Good morning and welcome to the TMF Inspection Readiness webinar. This is Brian Anderson with EXL Events. We're proud to partner with the Avoca group for this live webinar, and I just would mention this is our second year in a row doing a partnership with the Avoca group via this webinar. Last year we did it with Janice Hall, who actually will be presenting at the 8th TMF Summit this January. So you can hear her there. We'll send you some information about that event afterwards, and I don't want to say too much about it now because there's lots for you to look at when you have time, and we'll be sure to include some information about that in a follow-up email. I'm just here to principally tell you how happy we are again to partner with the Avoca group and to introduce Chrissy McDonald, who's the Executive Director at the Avoca group. Thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just to introduce us, we are the Avoca group. We are a life science consulting firm dedicated to improving quality and compliance in the clinical trial execution process. We integrate deep subject matter expertise with industry-leading approaches and technology and tailor solutions that help companies build industry-leading quality management, inspection readiness, and effective oversight systems into their existing processes. Our mission is to have a positive impact on all clinical trials by helping clinical research companies increase quality, ensure compliance, and improve efficiency so that medicines can reach patients faster. Your attendance today is a testament to you wanting to participate in that, so we thank you. The consortium was established in 2011 and has since developed over 400 leading practices for its members. So each member organization receives company-wide access to a comprehensive and proprietary knowledge center containing these 400 leading practices, guidelines, tools, templates, and process documents, as well as AQC research and archived webinars. The AQC is a member-based, pre-competitive collaborative comprised of clinical operations, quality, and outsourcing professionals from pharma, biotech, CROs, and clinical service providers. We currently have more than 90 member companies. You'll see all of those logos listed here. If you do see that your company's name's on the slide but don't know how to access the Knowledge Center, give us a call or an email after today's webinar to request your login credentials. If you don't see your company's name on the slide and want to learn more about becoming a member, you can visit our website at www.theavocagroup.com or contact us after the webinar. So it is my pleasure to introduce the Avoca Senior Consultant, Terry Endress, who will be your presenter for today. So Terry has over 28 years in the pharmaceutical industry, spanning the complete R&D value chain, and his specific experience is leading change initiatives for improving trial master file performance. He's had leadership positions in clinical development, product teams, clinical trial material supply, and Six Sigma critical chain project management, as well as clinical project management. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you on to Terry, who's our presenter and our expert for today. So go ahead, Terry, and you can take it away with presenting as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Chrissy, and thank you, Brian. And good morning, good day, good evening to all of you that have joined this webinar. I'm Terry Endress, and of course I'm going to be speaking about TMF and inspection readiness. And what I thought I would do is basically cover the topic, spend maybe 9 slides up front to talk about the regulatory environment, and then maybe another 9 slides to speak to what we could all be doing to basically improve our performance around the trial master file. Through all of this, we've sprinkled a number of polling surveys to increase engagement and participation with the audience. And I'd actually like to start off with the first question, right? And the first question is the TMF at your company used for collecting essential documents, facilitating the management and conduct of the trial, auditing your clinical trials, or none of the above? And my request is that you would click all that apply for your particular situation. I'll give just a few more seconds here for the audience to finish their responses. All right, it looks like everybody's responded. So there were about 238 responses. Here's what those results look like. 94% saying their TMF is used for collecting essential documents, 71% for facilitating the management and conduct of the trial, and then 63% for auditing your clinical trials, and less than 2% for none of the above. Very good, and I'm not surprised by those results. I do have a question, right? And my question is, I'm curious how many of you may have recognized that those three potential responses were basically consistent with the upcoming regulatory definition of a TMF as proposed by the EMA in an upcoming guideline that will be released any day now. Currently, that guideline is not in effect, but when it comes out, we'll read how they are defining the TMF as a collection of the essential documents, right, that facilitates the conduct and management of the trial and allows evaluation of data integrity and GCP compliance. And almost as reflected on the results, I think all of our organizations have got the message loud and clear, right, that a trial master file is a collection of essential documents. It looks like there's pretty good uptake on those other two expectations, right, around you will use your TMF to facilitate the conduct and management of the trial, as well as to use it for evaluation of data integrity and GCP compliance. So I think that's encouraging to see that the numbers on those second two items were in the 70s and 60 percentiles. Because again, I think historically, we know about the collection of documents, but we're less aware of some of these more heightened expectations. All right, so what is this all that we are talking about in regard to trial master file and inspection readiness? Why all of the concern and attention? And what I thought we would do was actually start out first with a little bit of history and a little bit of regulatory context. And what I'm referring to is how ICH, right, which is the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, right, ICH. The ICH have issued a number of guidelines across the drug development spectrum. And there is an edition in particular, E6, that speaks to good clinical practice. And it's in good clinical practices that ICH, puts forth their definition and expectation of GCPs. And that expectation is that, we can demonstrate, or rather provide public assurance, that the rights, safety, well-being of trial subjects are protected, and that basically the clinical trial data are credible, right? We have data integrity. And that's at the core of GCPs. And both the FDA and the EMA share those objectives for their oversight of our clinical investigations as well. But I'm bringing up ICH and GCPs because it's really in this particular guideline, E6, that the whole concept of trial master files and that term essential documents basically have come into being. Right, so Section 8 of ICH E6 is actually titled Essential Documents for the Conduct of a Clinical Trial. And you'll see 8.1 reads that trial master files should be established. And then you'll also find in that section, Section 8, the definition around these essential documents, right? They are those documents that are individually and collectively permit evaluation of the conduct of the trial and the quality of the data produced. But likewise, within Section 8, ICH also puts together a preliminary list of what it considers to be essential documents. And then, you know, we need to have a little bit of a warning associated with that, because the essential documents that are listed are by no means exhaustive. And we'll go into that more in a little bit. But as we talk about ICH, E6 with GCPs, and in particular the section and requirements around trial master file, both the FDA and EMA, as well as numerous other global regulatory agencies, right, are both members of ICH and have adopted E6 as guidance for GCPs. Included in that, of course, would be guidance around the trial master file. But the extent to which these two agencies, the FDA and EMA, incorporate the requirements into their laws and regulations are actually quite different. So what I'm highlighting on this slide is the different approach for the FDA versus the EMA, right? And for both of these regulatory authorities, ICH E6, which includes Section 8 around the trial master file, right, is adopted as guidance for both agencies. But as we speak to the FDA, it's 21 CFR 312 that speaks to, you know, their laws and regulations governing investigational new drugs. And as you review 21 CFR 312, you will see that they do call out and mandate, you know, record keeping, record retention, the requirement that records are adequate, complete, and accurate. But you're not going to see, you know, terminology like trial master file jump off the page at you. Likewise, you're not going to see any specific reference to essential documents. The FDA also provides guidance and even reflects it in many of their regulations within 312 about basically good documentation processes. You know, we often refer to those good documentation processes as ALCOA, which means that the documents are attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And I provided a link in that orange box in the lower left that will connect you to the World Health Organization that has some very good explanation and definitions for ALCOA. But this approach by the FDA differs significantly from the EMA, right? So again, the EMA also adopted E6 as a guideline, but within the, you know, the laws of the European Union, there's Article 57 that will outright specify the requirement of a trial master file. Article 57 goes on to state that that trial master file shall at all times contain the essential documents. So again, your EMA is going to explicitly state the requirements of trial master file and essential documents. On top of that, the EMA goes on to elaborate on that definition of essential documents, or to expand what kind of records should also be included as essential documents, thereby should also be included in your trial master file. Lastly, Article 58 adds that these trial master files should be readily available, accessible, complete, legible, and traceable. And many of those are aspects of ALCOA that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But as I go back up to that Article 57, bullet number 3, where it says the TMF shall at all times contain the essential documents, that really leads us to the next slide, where we're talking about how, again, the TMFs need to be contemporaneous, or the records within the TMF basically need to be timely and up to date. And again, in this 2017 guidance on the TMF that is about to be released, they make note that it is important, therefore, to keep the TMF up to date with documents placed in the TMF in a timely manner, as this greatly assists the successful management of a trial. Now, this is a very important distinction, right? Because whether it be my opinion that's recorded in the orange call-out box at the bottom, which is also pretty consistent with the verbiage that you're seeing in this paragraph, it's increasingly over the past few years, our European regulatory agencies have increasingly been associating the effectiveness of their trial management file or trial master file management. They associate the effectiveness of that with the overall effectiveness of your managing the trial itself. So again, I think we're moving beyond just the mere requirement for a trial master file. And this wording, you know, in this paragraph is all about trying to get the sponsors and the investigators to understand that your trial master file is more than just document retention. Your trial master file should greatly assist the successful management of the trial. And so what I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to introduce an Avoca company team member, Maria Weber, who's Director of Clinical Quality Management at Merck. And Maria, what I'd like to do is just kind of prompt you with the question. You've recently had a number of inspections, whether that be the FDA or EMA. Did you sense this sentiment at all, that this whole thing around the trial master file greatly assisting the successful management of the trial as you were being inspected by the EMA and MHRA?
Yes. Hi, Terry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So one point I would like to make is that the principles of ALCOA relate to all documentation in the conduct of a clinical trial, including the TMF. Inspectors in the past, as well as auditors, have checked to see when notes to file were created to ensure that issues were addressed in a timely manner and not just in preparation for an inspection. So the timeliness of documentation within the TMF is critical.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you.
And Terry, I'm going to chime in here for a second. There's one question that came up that someone was looking, and I think it could be for both you and Maria to chime in, on some guidance around the word timely, in air quotes, if you will. So they wanted some guidance around what timely actually means.
Sure. So by definition,
okay, well,
a note... Oh, do you want to take this, Terry?
Go ahead, Maria.
Okay. So by definition, a note to file should really explain a break in a process that does not qualify for a deviation. So what inspectors and auditors are looking for is to make sure that when an issue arose, that you're telling the story and that you addressed it in a manner that is, I guess, quick to show response is probably the best way to describe timeliness or contemporaneous within documentation of your TMF.
Yes, and Christy will speak more about timeliness, maybe not to that level of detail, but we can always do a deep dive. But we'll talk more about that as we get into the responses a little bit later in the presentation. But for now, where we are is we've been talking about the regulatory environment, right? Where these regulatory requirements for TMF came from and how those requirements are reflected in the various laws and regulations between the FDA and the EMA. What I'd like to do now is basically transition into how these two agencies, the FDA and the EMA, then take these requirements for when they go out to visit the investigators and when they visit the sponsors to conduct their inspections. So on this slide, you'll see that it's subtitled BIMO Instructions to FDA Inspectors. And for those of you who may not be familiar with BIMO, BIMO is an acronym, right? It's for Bioresearch Monitoring, right? And the whole BIO program is basically comprised of a number of compliance program guidance manuals that basically the FDA has provided to these inspectors to help them with inspectional and investigational activities, right? So basically the FDA are providing their inspectors with this outlined approach for conducting their inspections. The diagram on the right is basically summarizing the key elements of that inspection guidance, right? So again, typically it might be that the FDA inspector is going to start out in the center of this circle where they're going to ask about organizations, organizational structure, personnel that were on the teams, what kind of third parties were involved, but basically everything around the organization and personnel as it related to this particular trial, right? And then starting at like 11 o'clock, they're going to then explore and ask questions around their test article, right, around its manufacture and its control and its reconciliation. ClinTrials.gov, you know, have you posted your trial information on ClinTrials.gov? They'll want to understand how you selected your investigators. Do you have their financial disclosure forms? Questions around how you selected your monitors and what was your approach for your monitoring plan. Your quality management system, adverse event reporting, data collection. And then you can see those last two, you know, outlined in red, electronic records and electronic signatures, as well as record retention, right? As it speaks to the specific instructions that are provided to the inspectors for carrying out their inspections, you know, the requirements around TMF and essential documents are not very explicit. It's more general. You can see the paragraph there, right? The inspector is expected to determine how the sponsor determines which records are used for regulatory purposes. For example, if there's an SOP and if it is followed. So there will be no specific reference to a TMF, no specific reference to essential documents. Instead, you will be basically asked to produce records that can support all of those areas in that circle. Now, there are increasing anecdotal examples of the FDA inspectors themselves asking to see the TMF and asking for TMF documents. And certainly, at the very least, you know, your TMF is your best means for responding to the documentation request that the inspectors might have, but you're not going to see that there's an explicit expectation within the regulations, right, that actually require you to have a TMF. Now, again, Maria, this might be an opportunity for you to jump in here that, you know, even though a TMF is not an absolute requirement for the FDA, how did you find a TMF to be helpful during your FDA inspections?
So I view the TMF as the backbone or way to tell the conduct of the trial through documentation. It ensures we are inspection ready, and we perform regular health checks on our TMF for our studies to help ensure that what is anticipated to be filed actually is.
All right, wonderful. I really do think it does become your best means for producing or responding to the request. Now, this was the overview of the FDA. As we compare that into the EMA, and again, just like the FDA, they provided guidance to their inspectors in the industry. This guidance is reflected in their Annex 4. That's a part of IRregularities, Volume 10. Right, so basically IRregularities is the collection of rules and regulations governing medicinal products in the European Union. You can think of that as European Union Regulatory Affairs or Regulatory Agency lexicon. But you can see from the colored boxes that they're basically going to be interested in the same kind of things that the FDA inspectors are interested in. But when you get down to that lower left-hand corner with the clinical trial documentation, that green box I've outlined in red, the EMA, just like in their regulations, they're also far more explicit and specific in regard to their expectations of the TMF. They're going to expect that you have one. They're going to expect that the TMF is used as the vehicle for their researching your clinical trial. And they're also going to ask that an index be provided to assist them in locating documents that might be scattered throughout your trial master file. Now, again, Maria, this might be an opportune time for you to maybe share with us what your experience was with the EMA wanting direct access to your TMF, and did they have any expectations in regard to indexing?
Sure. So the FDA has typically wanted over-the-shoulder access before, where a subject matter expert from the sponsor company gives a demonstration or retrieves documents that are requested by the inspector, whereas the EMA and the MHRA have wanted direct access, where they can log into the system and retrieve their requested documents, testing the system on their own. So at my current company and other companies I've worked at, we've kind of followed the definition or the indexing model that is within ICH E6 Section 8, which lists the essential documents that are required for a trial master file.
All right, very good. Thank you, Maria. So again, as we're talking about inspections, you can see here that in your EMA environment, there's going to be very specific and explicit expectations around trial master file. With the FDA, it is not mandated, but they might still ask for it. At the very least, they're going to be interested in whatever kind of electronic records and electronic signature systems you employed in the conduct of that trial. So ER and ES stands for electronic records and electronic signatures. Let me add one more thing here as we're talking about inspections and the different agencies' approaches to these inspections. But what's provided here is basically a summary from the MHRA. They have an inspectorate blog, and this direction or information was posted in July of 2015. The blue boxes are speaking to expectations, whereas the red boxes are speaking to potential repercussions. And what it's saying here is that as you are notified, right, as a sponsor company, as you are notified that you're about to be inspected, they are likely to also include in that notification or send separately, you know, these comments around, hey, we're expecting you're going to have a trial master file. And that you will tell us, you know, how the TMF will be provided, how you intend to supply the documentation, and what system access will be provided if multiple platforms are used. And if you'll notice on that blue bar, I've got that little starburst that, you know, talks about hybrid TMFs. We'll be talking about hybrid TMFs more later, but you want to be careful as you are responding back to the MHRA as to what kind of TMF you have. Make sure you understand if you have a paper TMF, an eTMF, a hybrid, or whatever. Because they're going on to say that it's important to take advantage of this opportunity to go over these requirements. Not only could it save you from a critical finding on inspection, it could prevent the refusal of the application. Right, so the stakes are very high. Basically what all of this is speaking to is you don't want to be in a situation to where you have basically had a compliant and well-conducted trial, but your TMF is not adequately able to represent that. Kind of last but not least on the inspections, let me bring up one more item, and that has to do again with that contemporariness of the trial master file. Right, within the EMA, you may find that they will conduct in these different member states, member countries, periodic routine system inspections. Right, so that's not a notification saying we're going to inspect you on a specific trial. This is a periodic inspection of your quality management system, right? So that you can demonstrate that you're assuring GCP compliance across all of your trials, And as a result of those periodic routine system inspections, they will typically ask for the trial master file for a handful of trials chosen at random, right? If you were to have one of these routine system inspections, would all of your trials be inspection ready? So I put in that call-out box down at the bottom, right, that basically it's important to move your TMF mindset, within your companies from this inspection readiness thinking to a state of being, right, to where you don't have this periodic, often chaotic, one-time events where you're scrambling to prepare for an inspection. You basically need to have complete, correct, and current trial master files throughout the conduct of that trial. Maria, do you have any specific approaches for how you go about being inspection ready at any given point in time?
Hi, yes. So we have periodic quality checks. We have an essential document list, which we can pull from our hybrid TMF system. And that will show us the percentage of documents that we have expected and what is supposed to be filed within our TMF. And that helps us kind of fill in the gaps and make sure that we do have everything that we need. So that was kind of what I was referring to before when I mentioned health checks of our TMF on a regular basis. So I really find that that helps us be inspection ready at all times.
All right, wonderful. So basically, we've gone through then the regulatory environment, the laws, the regulations, what the inspections might look like. Now let's move into the second half of the presentation where we want to speak to what we can be doing to improve our performance as it relates to our trial master files. And that I think a kind of simple way of describing a way forward is, you and your companies will likely have to incorporate the more stringent European requirements into your quality management systems, right? And I think a simple way of describing what it is you're wanting to incorporate or what you want to achieve through SOPs associated with your trial master file is that you want to assure that your trial master files are complete, correct, current, available and accessible throughout the conduct of the trial, right? Complete, correct, current, available and accessible throughout the conduct of that trial. And what we'll do is we'll walk through each of these pillars, but I want to start out first with another polling question, and that is, at your company, do you require a TMF plan for each trial? About 10% have responded. All right. Basically, we can see it's a good 85-15 of requiring a TMF plan versus not having that specific requirement. I think as we talk about TMF plans, a simple way of kind of summarizing it is you're probably not going to be successful about having complete, correct, current trial master files if you don't have a plan for getting them. So what I've highlighted on the right in the yellow checklist, right, is that a TMF plan, right, is an integral part of your formal processes for defining and maintaining a trial master file. Elements of a trial master file plan might include how you go about inventorying your expecting documents, your inventory and planned access to peripheral systems, more on that, your document index, roles and responsibilities, which might relate to the TMF ownership or particular record ownership, your central or distributed means of uploading of records, the metrics, your quality checking, and don't forget this has to encompass your third parties, both their records and their roles. As we move into, complete TMFs then, I think, again, a very simple statement starts out with, in order to understand how complete you are, you have to also understand what you're expecting. As I move to the diagram on the right-hand side of that page, this diagram is a diagram of TMF record types, right? And the blue circle in the middle, right? Those are your ICH essential documents that were spelled out in the table in Section 8. The red circle that encompasses it, right, is the expanded definition and inclusion of essential documents that you're producing on a trial that basically need to be in your trial master file. The larger green circle then are more, cross-compound or records that aren't generated at a specific trial level, but they would be things that might be inspected, such as master service agreements with your contractors, validation documents for your systems, GMP records, and so forth. But basically, as we're talking about complete TMFs, the first bullet point is you have to establish how many records you're expecting and what kind. The way you develop that inventory and map of expected records, you can use the E6 essential documents as a starting point. Think about other trial-specific records, including your third parties, including records that are generated as a result of your quality system, non-trial specific records. The next bullet is reading, consider utilizing an index standard. At the bottom of the page in the blue, I've created a link here to the TMF reference model. Right, the reference model will not only provide you with a standardized or consistent means of indexing your records, it also serves as a prompt for which of these records do you actually produce. Be careful about your management of the expected number of documents, right? Because, for example, an amendment or a version to a new document increases the number that are expected. Just be careful about chasing your tail, right, that you don't end up spending so much time on managing the number of expected documents that you're not providing adequate oversight of your trials. And then just a summary comment, the inventory of expected documents may become the basis for a TMF index. But certainly, as we're talking about complete TMFs, you have to start with an understanding of what records are expected for your TMF. Keys for success then come down to basically, sure, those records get into your trial master file. So again, I've got a diagram on the right-hand side. In this case, the diagram is similar in nature, but it's a record of TMF locations. So once again, the red circle here is referring to your primary paper or electronic TMF. And more than likely in your green circle, you have a number of other clinical systems that are utilized for the creation of records and management of your trial. Your electronic data capture system, your document authoring tool, email, CT material supply, and so forth. Likewise, that purple outer band is highlighting you might have some other systems or controlled libraries, right, that contain other documents that are not trial specific, but might need to be inspected by an inspector. And again, that's where you get into your validation records, into your contracts, and so forth. So your keys to success, number one, develop your complete inventory and map. But as you're talking about record or document generation, hey, where you push from those external systems into your primary eTMF. Signpost or link to external systems. publish reports into your eTMF. If you're maintaining tracker spreadsheets, maintain those in the eTMF. Don't maintain them outside the system and then think to periodically put them in. An important thing here as well, minimize signatures, right? There's only a handful of records that from a regulatory standpoint are required to be wet ink signed. Minimize your other records that you currently signed because of your SOPs. Where you do have to have signatures, maximize e-signature. So again, it gets in your primary eTMF. Maybe last but not least, within your document creation SOPs, maybe highlight that the record is not complete until it's deposited in the trial master file. Other key to success then is you basically want to sample and measure how complete your trial master file is. As we move into correct trial master files, again, here's where we get into Alcoa. You can refer to that WHO document that I referred or had a link to earlier. But again, correct records are attributable, legible, traceable, and permanent, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and you'll sometimes see Alcoa Plus, and the plus means those records need to be complete, correct, enduring, and always available. Keys to success, you'll see with those red check marks that a lot of the keys to success for having a complete TMF to begin with, a lot of those same activities will help you to have a correct TMF. Basically, incorrections, if you will, or errors are going to come about from human manipulation, right? You produce a record, somebody signs it, and then you scan it and you upload it. Did you scan it correctly? Did you upload it correctly? If you generate the records within the eTMF, it's going to be correct, right? If you have validated IT integrations of records that have been generated in a way that assures their correctness, those are going to be correct. So again, those keys to success that help you have a complete TMF will also help you to have a correct TMF. Other things to consider, what number of persons are scanning records? How often do they do that? Do you have 1,000 people around the world that once a year scan an essential document? What's the likelihood they're going to do that correctly? Consider consolidating or centralizing, uploading of records, but you need to do that in a way without relinquishing record ownership. And as before, you want to sample and measure accordingly for these correct TMFs. From a current standpoint, another polling question, well, not a polling question, excuse me, but is this your company's experience when preparing for an inspection, right? Where you have this hockey stick kind of approach that you're going along with your trial documentation, you're alerted of an agency notification, and boom, suddenly your number of records are coming in at a rate 10 times what it was before. Well, basically what we're saying here is, in order to have current TMFs, you want to have these timeliness targets, right? So this kind of speaks to the question from earlier of timeliness targets should be developed for two different elements. One would be cycle time, that is how long from record generation until it's deposited or received in the TMF. And then also maybe timeline targets around milestones. What records should have been there at the first patient visit for a particular country. Sample and measure accordingly. Look at milestone completeness reports and think about periodic reviews where your different functional areas or contributors to the trial master file go in and see how they're doing with those timeliness targets. I don't want to belabor those same keys for complete and correct, but if you generate those records within the trial master file, or if you generate them externally but have been pushed in through a validated IT integration, you're more likely for them to be complete, correct, and current. As we move into available and accessible, I wanted to interject our last polling question here, and that is the TMF at your company predominantly a paper TMF, electronic TMF, or hybrid TMF? All right, looks like we have responses from most of the audience. Paper coming in around 12%, electronic 51%, and hybrid 36%. On my next slide, I mean, kind of forgive me a little bit here, but to some extent that was a trick question. A trick question because I put in, quotation marks there that all TMFs are hybrid TMF. Now, of course, there are exceptions, right? You will have all paper TMFs or maybe some all eTMFs, but by and large, for your larger phase 3, confirmatory kind of trials, you're going to have a mix of paper records and electronic records. And it might be it's a mix between your internal records versus the CROs. Or you're going to have a mix of paper records plus electronic records, right? You're going to keep all of your statistical analysis in your statistical analysis software system. Or you might have an eTMF, but just as before, and just like it's shown in that diagram in the green circles, you have any number of other peripheral clinical systems that are utilized to conduct that trial. Well, basically, the records in those systems are part of the TMF. And if you haven't moved those electronic records into the primary eTMF, you have a hybrid TMF. And one of the reasons why I'm raising this point is remember that MHRA notification earlier, right? That as they said, you need to explain to us what kind of TMF you have and how we would be given access. You don't want to tell them you have a paper TMF or an eTMF if indeed you have a hybrid TMF. For paper TMS, an expectation is going to be, or paper documents, that they'll be expected to be delivered upon reasonable notice. Access to eTMS are expected to be essentially immediate, or maybe more accurately, access to electronic records would be expected to be essentially immediate. And as we're talking about essentially immediate, direct access includes access to all of those systems in the green and potentially in the purple, right? And some things to think about is, now, if I show you before and after, watch how that, the red part of the circle grows. Ideally, you would want to have as many of your records in your primary paper or eTMF as possible, and you minimize the number of ancillary systems. Now, in today's pharmaceutical environment, that can be very difficult, but think about that. Because for each of those systems in the green and potentially those purples, if you're saying that those systems contain trial master file records, you need to provide access for the inspector into each of those systems. And that could wind up with a long list of systems, system owners, and how you're going to provide, guided access or direct access. So we're rounding the bend here. Let me get to my summary slide and then we'll ask some questions. But in closing, I just want to highlight that, hey, there are real differences in TMF requirements and inspection expectations between the FDA and the EMA. But there are also real opportunities for value add with effective TMF management. These requirements and opportunities should be incorporated into your sponsor's quality management system, where your overarching objective is complete, correct, and current trial master files available and accessible throughout the conduct of the trial. Leverage the features and functionality of your eTMF and associated systems. Most importantly, inculcate a mindset of TMF inspection readiness as a state of being. And let's try to move away from this mindset of inspection readiness being a preparation activity that's done on a periodic basis that is a chaotic one-time event. So with that, we have around 10 minutes for questions.
That was really helpful.
I know, Chrissy.
Yeah, so Terry, I have some questions in the team chat for you, so you can grab those there. Otherwise, for those who are in attendance, there is a question and answer place that you can enter your questions that we can submit to both Terry and Maria who are on the phone. And lastly, there's been a couple of questions about a recording. There will be a recording, so we'll be able to get that out to everyone afterwards. I know some people have been having some audio issues. That being said, Terry, do you see the questions there? Would you like me to pick some out for you?
Well, I was wondering if maybe you had an idea of maybe priority or importance.
No, I think there's a couple of different ones. There's a few that have come in a couple of times. The first was just some clarification on a abbreviation that you would utilize. So the ER/ES.
Yes.
So can you just again explain what that acronym is and what it stands for?
Right, so that was electronic records and electronic signatures.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that came up quite a few times was asking about whether the FDA and the EMA expect the TMF to be Part 11 compliant.
Well, if it's an eTMF, yes.
Excellent, thank you. There were quite a few questions around industry-leading practice in terms of, there was a couple of different terms. I saw both QC checks and ultimately just a completeness check in terms of what is the standard frequency from an industry perspective to look at those? Is it monthly, quarterly, et cetera?
And I'm sorry, to look at what?
Like QC checks or completeness checks of the TMF?
I could tell you from my
experience. Please do, Maria.
Okay. I can tell you from my experience, we send out a percentage, it's like a pie chart, on a weekly basis for most of my studies, but the review for regular run-of-the-mill studies has been about every 3 to 6 months.
That's great, thank you. And actually, to tag honors, that actually segues very nicely into another question. So there was a couple of questions that talked about, when you're looking at percentage complete, how do you do that, knowing that at the start of the trial it's always going to look low? So do you adjust for records that aren't expected until trial completion? Is that a manual effort? Is it something that you do via computer system? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Right, and that's where I think, go ahead, Maria.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can tell you from my experience, because we are using a hybrid TMF, that we are easily able to pull these types of reports, and then we just state with the caveat that these are not expected yet.
Mm-hmm. And I think as well, that's where if you get a copy of the presentation, I make reference to there are two elements to timeliness. One is, cycle time based, that you put some targets in regard to how soon after creation do you expect it to be in the system. But I think maybe more so to that particular question would be, you also want to have some milestone targets and mini milestone targets, right? So that you know that at different phases of the delivery of that trial, you know that you should have some of those documents already in place. And in that regard, your percent complete is relative to where you should be at that point in your trial.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
There's a question here, Chrissy. What do you think about documents which are collected in the investigator site file and should be mirrored in eTMF? Although ICH GCP states that collection in ICF is sufficient, ICF is a part of TMF as eTMF is a part of TMF. Right, so I think that starts to get into a little bit of nuances. I do think you'll see records that even in ICH Section 8, it will say these are records that need to be in both the sponsor as well as the site's TMF. Typically, your approach is going to be that a document that originates at the site but needs to be in the sponsor, you would make a copy of that record and put it in the trial master file. You would understand or note that the original is located in the investigator site file. Hence, that is the original record.
Excellent, Terry. Thanks. I think we have time for one more. There's a couple that have come through here talking about integrating TMF. And so they give a variety of examples. There's one example that talks about if the CRO has an eTMF and the sponsor has a paper eTMF, how do you incorporate that to fulfill the requirement of a complete TMF? Another example talks about using multiple eTMF vendors across various clinical trials. So what are your thoughts overall on best practices for integrating these multiple repositories to allow inspections and sponsors to review everything in one system?
Mm-hmm. There are some options, right? But I think more than anything else, it has to start with a thorough understanding of what are the records, what are your TMF records, whether it be at the sponsor or at the CRO, but you have to understand what the totality of your TMF looks like. Then you can make some decisions or determinations in regard to how you want to make that complete trial master file available to that inspector, right? I don't know if this would be possible, right? But an example can be, hey, inspector, you're here at our site. Here is the record location, and the paper records are here, and here's a terminal where we have access to these other systems where the records are located. I'm not telling you you have to do that, and in many instances that's not even possible, but that becomes ways of doing that, right? It might be that I've seen that a CRO will do a flurry of printing of the records and put it with the sponsor's paper TMF, knowing that you have to be a little careful because you're not going to have all of the audit trail aspects when you do that, and the inspector still might want to see the original source records in that original system, but at least they will be able to inspect the trial for compliance through that paper location.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I just want to let everyone know as well that those questions we weren't able to ask today, we will do our best to go through, get those answered, and send those responses out to all of the attendees today. But with that, I think we are running out of time. If you could just move to the last slide, that would be helpful. I want to thank Terry and Maria for joining today. It was very helpful and educational. I hope all of you on the phone enjoyed as well. Andrea, do you want to discuss some of the upcoming webinars? Okay, I will. So we have an AQC upcoming webinar as well as some other upcoming webinars and some presentations at the Crown Congress and the TMF File Summit, or excuse me, the TMF Summit coming up that you're welcome to participate in. And again, we hope we found this presentation helpful. So if you need any additional information, the contact information is here. Again, the The slides will be available, as will the recording. So thank you, everybody, for joining today. Thank you again, Maria and Terry. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.